Okay, so now we get to part two of law in the courts. And this is actually chapter 9, or the judiciary. And this is like the third political institution that we're going to be talking about in this course. And the other ones, of course, were the legislature and the executive office, or the governor's office. So this is the judiciary. And as I said, I lectured on the other part first so that you could understand this lecture, because this lecture is going to be talking about the different levels of courts and the jurisdiction for these courts and the types of cases that these courts hear. Okay, so the learning objectives for this particular section is that we're going to be talking about the court system in Texas. And there's many different levels of courts, as I told you in the last section. There's the municipal courts, which are basically city. There are county level courts, there are state district level courts, and there are appellate courts. And Texas has 2 appellate courts, not just one like at the U.S. level. And I've told you before when we talked about the Constitution, and I'm going to be telling you again in this lecture, is that all of our judges are elected. So we're going to be talking about the politics of electing judges in the state of Texas. Okay, let's talk about the court organization in Texas. Well, it's kind of, how you can say, complicated. It's complicated because there are numerous levels within the court system. And it's complicated because there's overlapping of jurisdictions. So we'll try to get through this as best as we can, and I'll try to make the distinctions of the different court cases. Okay, well, before we get to that, though, I need to talk to you a little bit about the difference between misdemeanors and felonies. And so this comes from chapter 10. So misdemeanors are minor crimes. Misdemeanors would be something like, vandalism. It might be like the first time DWI, whereas felonies are the more serious crimes, the ones that you actually go to like a state prison. The misdemeanors is county jail, the felonies is state prison. And so for those, it would be things like murder, sexual assault, burglary, theft, those types of things, more serious crimes. But look at chapter 10 and it'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But you need to understand the difference between these two. Otherwise, this part of the lecture is not going to make much sense to you. Okay, the first level of court that I want to talk to you about is the municipal court, or the city court. And so the city court will handle criminal misdemeanors such as like vandalism, where there is no jail time. The one that you would know municipal court is if you've ever gotten any kind of ticket, whether it's a speeding ticket, I ran a red light, or whatever, traffic violation. This is where you would have gone to settle this case, the municipal court. Okay, the municipal court, or the city has many ordinances, or I think I kind of mentioned to you way long time ago that we call everything a law, but there's actually different levels of laws. At the national level, they all are called a law. At the state level, they're called statutes. At the city county level, they're called ordinances. So we have a lot of ordinances at the city level, and examples of a city ordinance would be like, for example, we have like if you're walking your dog, it's got to be on a leash, like it's called the leash law. If that dog gets out and bites somebody, well, then there are more severe consequences. Because of this dangerous dog, there might be more penalties for that one. There are other ordinances, like for example, you have to have your yard has to be like mowed. It can't be more than so many inches. That is a municipal ordinance. So they will be looking at different types of ordinances, and if a person is found, it might be fined and may have to go to court because of this. Okay, let me give you another example of this one. I live in a townhouse complex, and so one time they were doing the yard, they're cutting the lawn or whatever, and they were blowing all of the grass into the streets. And somebody called and reported us. And so the city code enforcement came out to the complex, and they were talking to the board members, and they said, this has to be cleaned up by 2 o'clock this afternoon. Otherwise, we are going to be issuing a $5,000 fine to your complex. $5,000, can you believe that? And so they called the landscaper, the one that does the lawn work, and they said, you need to get your butts back out there and clean that up because they're going to fine us, and you shouldn't be doing that anyway. So that's like another example. And then when it comes to the dangerous dogs, Corpus Christi has a really bad problem with just dogs just wandering around, just stray dogs, and a lot of them are those considered to be the dangerous breeds. And so some of the dangerous breeds, I don't remember them all, but they're for sure the pit bulls. And Corpus Christi seems to have like a larger percentage of pit bulls than any other city that I've ever seen. They can be like Dobermans, they can be Rottweilers, maybe German Shepherds, I'm not sure. Some, as I said, Chihuahuas, maybe, I don't know. But anyway, so there's like several different types of dogs, and and so the big deal is this: if you have one of these breeds, you have to keep them under your control at all times, whether it be on a leash if they're out in public, or they have to be behind a fence. You cannot let them just wander around. They cannot be stray dogs. If they bite somebody, yes, they can take you to court, and it would be through this court, the municipal court. Okay, the next type of court I want to talk about are the county courts, and they're called justice courts. They used to be called justice of the peace courts. That's how the book refers to them as, but they're called the justice courts. So the justice courts will hear cases on civil actions under $10,000, and they call this a small claims court. A little bit ago, I was telling you that in the event that, say, you have a contractor that you contract with somebody saying you're going to do this, paint my house, whatever, and the charge is going to be $6,000 to paint the house, but they never have painted it, and they keep refusing to come out and paint it. Well, if you have a contract, you can take them to this court because it's considered to be the small claims court, because $6,000 is under the $10,000 limit, and you don't need an attorney for this one. You can go ahead and represent yourself. They will also do criminal misdemeanors with fines, and an example of a criminal misdemeanor that may become more of a felony later, but an example would be like the graffiti, depending on how much damage that vandalism causes. Once a person is tagging all of these things, they say it's going to cost, like so much money to fix this up. Well, it can be heard in one of these justice courts. Okay, so this particular court was established by the county commissioners, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the county commissioners a little bit later on in this lecture. But it's known as the People's Court, and if you watch Judge Judy or any of those, that's the kind of court it is. It's the People's Court, and in this court they will also perform marriages. So if you want to get married by a judge, you go to the Justice of the Peace, and it's the Justice of the Peace that will marry you. Okay, I want to talk more about county court. That was a justice court. Now we're going to be talking about other types of courts within the county, and these are called trial courts. So let's talk about these. The first one I want to talk about is called the Constitutional County Court. The Constitutional County Court, and so the Constitution, the Texas Constitution, says that every county has to have a constitutional county court, and so this court can hear cases, but they don't really hear cases. If they did hear cases, they would have original jurisdiction for civil actions between $200 and $10,000 if they heard cases. If they heard cases, again, when it comes to the criminal ones, they could hear cases over criminal misdemeanors. Original jurisdiction for criminal misdemeanors with fines greater than $5,000, and this is the first one that can start to assess a jail sentence. A jail sentence. The first court that can start to assess a jail sentence. Okay, so for this one, the judges are elected, but let me talk to you a little bit about this one. This particular court, the Constitutional County Court, is what's known as the Commissioner's Court, the County Commissioner's Court. So This particular court is the one that runs the county. At the city, you may have heard of the city council because that's on the news pretty often if you listen to the news, and everybody knows that we have a mayor. Well, the counties also have somebody that needs to run them. And so this one is called the county judge and the county commissioners. Okay, so those are the ones. It's the governing body for the state of Texas. So the judges are elected. They run based on party labels, and they are elected for 4-year terms. So it's a governing body for all of Texas counties. So because they have administrative responsibilities, it's not particularly a judicial entity, which means that they don't really hear cases because they kind of work full time. So there's just not much time to handle judicial matters because they're running the county. They're the governing body for the county. They have administrative responsibilities. Okay, so then you should ask yourself, well, then who does hear the cases at the county level? Well, it's this one called the County Courts at Law. It's a supplemental court that was established by the Texas Constitution in order to be able to hear these cases that the constitutional county court can't hear because they have administrative responsibilities. Okay, so the county courts of law have limited jurisdiction over civil matters, mostly under $100,000. And again, they have limited jurisdiction over misdemeanor criminal matters. So civil matters under 100,000, misdemeanors. They handle the misdemeanors. So it's considered to be a supplemental court, and they can have either civil or criminal jurisdiction. By far, they will handle more of the criminal misdemeanor cases just to get them, like through the system or whatever. However, they will also handle like civil cases because I've been called for jury duty many times, although I've never served. And they're usually in one of these county courts at law. And so the last one, the last time I was called, it was one of these, and it was because it was against a personal injury. It was somebody that had a wreck, person didn't have insurance. Hey, I just want you to pay for my medical bills, that type of thing. Okay, another type of court at the county level are the probate courts, and you may or may not have heard of this term, so let me talk about a little bit about this one. When probate means that when somebody dies, that in order for the estate to be settled, the judge has to say, yes, this person, I'm giving this person the authority to be able to settle this estate for the deceased person. So the probate court is the one that will assign a person, and they call it the executor, and the executor will dispose of that estate, and they will settle the property. So the probate court has is limited only to probate matters. They only handle probate matters, and so basically they're looking at protecting the rights that the will has established. Like, say for example, if somebody dies with the will, you do have to go through probate because the judge will say, and they give you a legal document, this person has the right to sell this house, this person has the right to get into these bank accounts, this person has the right to dispose of this property, whatever they're going to do, sell it off, whatever they're going to do, but you need that legal document. So that's protecting the rights that are stipulated in the will. Now, if you die with no will, that's called that you died intestate, not interstate like a highway, intestate. You died with no will. And so you will have to go to court again, and the court's going to determine who inherits this estate. Well, if there's an estate. And so they're going to be looking for the relatives of this particular person. And so if no relative can be found, and they do a pretty exhaustive search, they will hold that money for years and years and years. But if no relative ever steps forward to receive that inheritance, then that money is going to stay with Texas. It's going to pass on to the state. All right, and so when it comes to the probate, as I said, it protects the rights through the will. And so what happens a lot of times is somebody may be written out of the will, and that person wants to contest the will. So just keep that in mind about where that person would need to go. Okay, the next level up are the state level courts or the district courts. They're called the district courts. All right, so the district courts have original jurisdiction for civil actions over 200, but a lot of times those are handled by the county courts at law. And other civil actions would be the divorces. If you're going to get a divorce, it has to be through a district court. If you are having problems with title to a land or contested title to a piece of land, then it's the district court that has to decide who owns that property. If there is an election that is really close to call and there are just numbers, just a few voters, difference or whatever, and the courts may have to decide, okay, then it would go to one of these district courts if it's going to be a contested election. If somebody is contesting a will, this is where they would go. They would have to go to the district court if it's a contested probate matter. So this is a court. So one is a probate court, somebody's contesting the will, then they come to the next higher level court, which is the state level court. Okay, so when it comes to criminal matters, this is important. This is the court that has the original jurisdiction for all felony criminal matters. The county court at law, misdemeanors, the county court's misdemeanors. This is the first one that handles the felony criminal charges. They will also do juvenile matters. And some district courts, especially in the larger cities like Houston, they have separate criminal courts because, here in the United States, you have to have like a speedy trial. And so what happens is that some courts may be named just criminal courts so that they can dispose of those cases as speedily as possible. Okay, so the district courts are considered to be the chief trial courts for the state of Texas, And so some of them have concurrent powers with the county courts, like the county court at law, that especially when it comes to like the civil actions, they'll ship it to the county court because they're saying they can do it quicker than the district courts because we have to hear all of these felony cases. And so for this one, the district courts, all of the judges are elected. They are elected based on their party, and they will serve 4-year terms. Okay, I've been talking about criminal cases and I've been talking about civil cases. Well, this is the issue. With the criminal cases, what happens a lot of times is that a case may be plead out, and they call it a plea bargain. And there are many different reasons why a person may want to plea or cop a plea, and that's kind of how they say it on TV, may want to cop a plea. And so basically what that does is that they will get a reduced sentence for a lesser charge. So they will say, if you accept this lesser charge, say for example, they are being charged with murder, and then they say, and the plea bargain is, we will charge you with manslaughter and reduce your prison sentence, and that way you don't have to go to trial, because they're saying that it's going to save time and money. So the issue with the plea bargains, and they're trying to get rid of as many criminal cases as they can. That's the whole thinking behind it. But it says, well, who are these people that are actually, getting these deals, that they're actually winding up in jail, whether they may or may not have done it. I mean, that's a different issue, but it might raise questions of equity and justice. And what happens a lot of times is that, like part of the Miranda rights, you have the right to remain silent. An attorney will be appointed for you if you can't afford one. Well, for these particular attorneys that are pro bono, that they're appointed by the courts, to handle these cases, they may or may not have the skills necessary to defend a person. They're attorneys, but not all attorneys are criminal attorneys. And so what they do a lot of times is they're saying, well, we'll just go ahead and take the plea. And so this person may have gotten a better deal going to trial, or maybe not. We'll never know. But it does raise those questions of equity and justice, because if you don't have money to hire your own attorney, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever you're assigned. All right, so when it comes to the civil cases, a lot of times they will settle these cases. And so settling the cases means that they've negotiated between the parties. And so, a lot of times the actual settlement is not known. I'm sure you've heard like on TV when they have all of these personal injury attorneys come out and say, I got so many $1 million for my client. Okay, well, those are no negotiated settlements. And then some will say, no, we never settle, we always go to trial. I get these huge settlements or these huge judgments or whatever. So it just depends. So a settlement is a negotiation between parties that you will not go to court. You will settle outside of court. And so a lot of times what happens is that because the criminal cases have to be heard first, that the civil cases will get pushed back to back in time. They get in the docket. That's what it's called. They keep getting pushed back on the docket and back on the docket. So it may take like 3 years for a civil case ever to get to court. And some people may say, well, I'm not working, I need the money. So they go ahead and they settle. Okay, so now I want to talk about the appellate court. So they go to trial, there's a verdict, there's a judgment, etc., etc. And so this person may say, I want to appeal my case, or the attorney may say, we're going to appeal the case. So let's talk about the intermediate one, the state intermediate appellate court. There's two levels, and this one is called the Court of Appeals. And so, as I said, they're looking at the application of law. And so what this one is looking at is they're looking at the application of law from the trial courts, or read that, the district courts. And so there's about 14 courts that will do both civil and criminal cases. And again, they're looking at the application of law. And actually, a very small number of cases are actually appealed. Even though they say that they're going to appeal it, they don't really do it, because as they're looking through it, they see that the law was actually followed. So not that many cases are able to be appealed based on this application of law criteria principle. And so for this one, the judges have to have more experience, and they call these are starting to be called justices, and they're elected for 6-year terms. So they have to have more experience. They have to have served as a district judge in some capacity before they can be eligible to run for a Court of Appeals judge or justice. Okay, now we get to the highest levels, and everybody's heard of the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, Texas is a little bit different, because in Texas we have two of them. And I talked a little bit about this when we talked about the Constitution. We have one that just does the criminal cases, and then we have one that just does the civil cases. So let's talk about the one for the criminal cases. So this one is called the Court of Criminal Appeals. And so the Court of Criminal Appeals is the final appellate jurisdiction for all criminal cases. And so most of the cases are decided at that lower level court, the intermediate court. So we have the district court. From there it would be like the intermediate Court of Appeals, and then it's the Court of Criminal Appeals. And so they might review what the intermediate court did, what the Court of Appeals did, but few actually make it up to this highest level Court of Criminal Appeals. So the way that this one is set up is that there is a presiding judge, and there are 8 judges or justices. And so they will look at the case and they will render some type of deciding opinion. And so for this one, the judges have to have served usually as an appellate judge in the lower court, and so there are even more strict qualifications to be elected. They do run on party label. It's a partisan election. And they're elected for 6 years. That's their term, is 6 years. Okay, but this is the important thing about the Court of Criminal Appeals. For all those people that are on death row in Texas right now, this court will automatically look at those cases. So this court has jurisdiction over automatic appeals in all death penalty cases. So by the time somebody is put to death, they're pretty sure that this is the person that's committed the crime, or that's the thinking anyway. So they have automatic appeal in all death penalty cases. Okay, so then the one that looks at the civil cases is called the Texas Supreme Court. Like the US Supreme Court, this is the one for Texas. But as I said, they have final jurisdiction for civil cases, final appellate jurisdiction over civil cases, as well as juvenile cases, although it's really more civil cases more so than juvenile cases, although they do have the responsibility of hearing those as well. And more so uh, they have the ability or the power to make the rules for the administration of justice here in Texas to include things like any kind of civil practice of how Texas is going to handle something, the different procedures of how they're going to be done in Texas, of licensing members of the state bar. You know, I always say or tell students that if you really want to be a lawyer, an attorney, and you want to stay in Texas, go to a Texas law school, because Texas is just like a whole other country. It has its own way of doing things. And so the one that sets up their own way of doing things is actually this entity, the Texas Supreme Court. Okay, other things that they can do is that they have like a watchdog function, and so they can actually uh, have somebody removed or voluntarily retire this particular judge if he's not doing a good job, and or that he's having ethical problems, or he's just incapacitated in some way. So it would be the Texas Supreme Court that would try to remove that judge. And for these, the judges are also elected against strict qualifications. Again, they run based on party label, and they are elected for 6-year terms. And so this particular court plays a role in making policy for the state of Texas. You know, I told you about the legislature, and they're the ones that make the laws. When it comes to the governor can issue executive orders that is pretty much like a law. And so for the judge, I mean for the the court system can render deciding opinions, and those actually have the same effect that a law would. So let me give you an example of something that the Supreme Court did that you would probably know about. You know, there was a lawsuit many years ago, well, not that many years ago, but maybe about 8 to 10 years ago, and this was a reverse discrimination lawsuit. And it was a suit that was filed by a female. She was a white female in the state of Texas at the UT Law School. And what she was saying is that she did not get into no, it wasn't the law school. It was the UT school. You know, it's like higher education. But she didn't get in. And so they went through this whole rigmarole about is it reverse discrimination or whatever. And so what they found out that UT was doing is that they had two lists. They had one list with all of the Anglo students, and then one list with the minority students. And that some of the minority students that were getting into UT did not have similar qualifications to the white students. So they went to the Supreme Court, and they said, Texas, you can't do, UT, you cannot do that anymore. You cannot have two lists. So then what was Texas going to do? So basically they said, okay, then they told the legislature, we're just telling you that this cannot be done. So in the state of Texas, the Attorney General said, Texas will no longer have affirmative action. We will have affirmative access. So then it went to the legislature, and the legislature had to decide, okay, how are we going to be able to, you know, to have affirmative action, but not call it affirmative action, to have this thing called affirmative access. So this is where that 10% rule came in, that if you were in the top 10% of your class, that you have automatic admission to some type of public university, whether it be a UT, but I think now they're at 8%. They got that one changed just a few years ago, but the top 10%. All right, so when they went back and they looked at the data saying, well, are we able to pick up minority students? I mean, is this 10% rule actually working? You know, I saw something just like a few weeks ago that they went back to look at it again saying, do we have to tweak it now? And so they looked at it and they said, no, it actually does. There's actually more minorities getting educated than under this affirmative action that we had before. So it's working. So that's a good for it. So the bottom line here is sometimes these things do work. Did I get your attention there? let's talk about, I keep telling you that the judges are elected and the judges are elected here in Texas. So let's talk about the politics of judicial selection and or election in the state of Texas. Okay, so this is the important part, and I've told you over and over again that in the state of Texas that judges are elected, except for like at the local level. But in the state of Texas, almost all of the judges are elected. And so it is often said that Texas has the best judges money can buy. So stop and think about that one for a minute. And you're sitting there going, well, if they're all elected, they're going to have to run as politicians. They become politicians. So if you become a politician, you have to raise money to be able to run, right? All right, keep that in mind. Okay, so when these judges are running, uh, they will run a lot of times, or they are going to run. They're always running up based on party identification. And the thing about this is that unless you work in the legal field, you don't know if a judge is a good judge or if a judge is a bad judge. And so what happens to these appellate judges, because they do make policy decisions, because they do render some type of way that Texas is going to run, a lot of times what they're referring back to is that their party affiliation, whether they're going to be more conservative or they're going to be more liberal. But I have to tell you that at this particular point in time, all of our judges are Republican. So they're going to follow that Republican ideology, which is really very pro-business, very conservative, very pro-business. And so it kind of raises that question is, well, I mean, are these judges for sale? And more importantly, is it going to affect the decisions that are made by these campaign contributors? You know, if there's a campaign contributor that comes before a judge, is that judge going to rule in favor of that particular contributor, campaign contributor? And so it raises the possibility of impropriety or bias. So it may affect their cases. I'm not saying that it does, but it certainly just does raise that possibility. Okay, so basically they're saying we don't know if these decisions made by the judiciary are going to favor big business and professional groups. There is a possibility that it may. And so some of these groups that may benefit, that are large campaign contributors and may benefit from contributing campaign funds are the Medical Association, the Texas Trial Lawyers Association, and the oil and gas people. Those three are the big ones that contribute the most to these judges' campaigns. Okay, so that ends the lectures on the Constitution then.